Hey everybody, Ted the Butcher here, coming back to you with more on the block. And again, we are talking about bottom round. More beef, more beautiful flavor, coming to you live and in color on the YouTubes. Or maybe you're checking out tedthebutcher.com. Either way, that's the greatest. So let's dive right in and talk about this. Here we have, from our last episode, this was the bottom round pot roast that we did. It's nice and tied up, ready to rock in a crock pot or even the oven. And so that's one thing that you can do with the bottom round. Now here we have the rest of this beautiful piece. A couple things. We can continue cutting this into roast. You can roast this whole piece and that's totally fine. Right now, what I'm going to show you is a couple different ways to do steaks. They have technically bottom round steaks I've seen before, or cube steaks. And the thing that you would do with either one of these pieces are great when you tenderize them with our hammer, or if you have any kind of a meat tenderizer. That's a great way to cook them. Throw them on the grill or in a very, very, very hot pan. Cook them fast, cook them quick, flip them over. You know, they're minute steaks, right? That's what we're kind of talking about here. Great pieces for that. If you cook them quick, maybe throw them on a roll with a little cheese, fried sauteed onion, a little mayonnaise. Hey, if you're doing that, call me up. I'm coming over. All right. Anyway, so let me show you a couple things. Now, in the last episode, if you noticed, before we cut this beautiful roast here, I showed you how to notch out this little. There's a channel of fat that runs right here at the base of this tendon. Actually, I could take a little bit more of that out so I could show you, just in case you didn't see the last time. All right, so there's some of that down there. We'll trim that up a little bit. So that loose fat on the end, we'll take that off. Okay, so you can see this. You got a little, you know, wad of fat that runs down through there. If you can see that, we definitely wanted to take out. So that's what I've done there, and it leaves you now. I've seen in stores before where they serve, you know, they'll put out a roast and that wad of fat is in there. And it just doesn't look too good. That's not going to do you any good when you cook it. So my feeling is that should always be trimmed out. That's something I've always done that when I've cut these into roast. But anyway, that was just sort of a follow-up, excuse me, on the last episode. So let's move forward and talk about steaks. Now, pardon me, the bottom round steak, I don't see this too often. What I see more often is the cube steak, which I'll get to in just a minute. But if you're going to cut a steak off of this, all right, you want to make sure to follow that grain. Now, as I explained in the last episode as well, this is a very important piece where you want to really pay attention to the grain. Because it's not going to be a piece that's going to be real tender. You have to cook it long and slow, not a lot of fat in it. So being cognizant of where that grain is going to make a big difference in how tender this steak is and how good it tastes. So the grain on this piece, which is simply these lines, these striations in the muscle, is running this way. So the grain's here, you're going to cut nice and parallel to the grain. All right? So if we take a steak off here, I'm only going to do one. Because again, this is not the most common cut I've seen for the bottom round. Pardon me, let me just move that there. All right, you have this nice little steak. There's some fat on the bottom. So what you're going to do there is just take that off. You really, if you're doing this in a steak fashion here, if you're doing it like this, you really don't want to have that too many wads of fat on there at all. Again, it's a very lean piece and all, but it's not going to eat right that way. Now, this has a little bit of that side flap over here on it. I left that on purpose because I'm going to show you how to take it off in just a minute. And you know, you can go ahead and leave that on. I've seen that on, but it's better if you take it and if you can see this line of fat right here. All right, let me hold that out. This line of fat. We're going to cut just inside so we have a nice steak off of that. So now keep in mind, this is a piece of trimming that we're definitely going to use in a minute. Probably actually on the next episode. So I'll show you that in a few. But here you go. So this is your basic top round steak. to be honest with you, I'm showing you this so that you know where it comes from and how a butcher would cut it. But it's not my favorite cut by any means. It's a little bit tough. It's a little bit tricky. What you want to do when you see this, so essentially, this is a little bit different than a cube steak, but we're going to kind of get the same result. So you're going to want to grab your hammer. Now, in the past, I've told you use the flat side. Well, for this, we're going to use the tenderizers. Okay? Doesn't really matter which one. You're probably going to want to start with the more coarse side, then go to the finer side. So when you have a piece like this, you just go ahead, start pounding that guy right there. I'll move these knives out of the way. Give it a few. Now, this is a nice firm piece of meat, nice muscle. You don't even have to worry so much about the paper on these. Flip that over. Alright, so you get the idea there. So basically, that is a nice tenderized bottom round steak. Alright, now that's something, again, it's a little bit thick. When I see these, I can't help but think they're a little too thick to even make this work well. But it's something I've seen in the store, and it's something I think it's important to share with you. So you got to know what you're doing with it. To take this one step further and really make it nice and tender, really make it something great to eat, I definitely recommend throwing it in a marinade. Anything, something like soy sauce or an Italian salad dressing is really good. An oil and vinegar based marinade is really good. Anything that's highly acidic helps break down that muscle tissue. All right, and that's what helps make it nice and tender. So that's basically what you would do with the bottom round steak. Now, let me show you how to make the cube steak, which I think is a better way to go about making like a minute steak out of these pieces. However, before we do that, it's going to require a little bit more prep to make it right. So generally, the cube steak is a little bit smaller, and it's made out of this main piece of muscle right in here. And when I say this main piece of muscle, I'm referring to the piece right in here that is it's bisected from the side flap by this tendon and silver skin. Sorry, it's not a tendon, it's more of just a piece of a cartilage and silver skin that runs right between these muscle tissues. And as I said, this is a good way to think about it is when you pull this wad of fat out from the bottom when you're making your roasts, that's exactly the piece of connective tissue that we are trying to remove. So first we're going to do that. You can see a nice line right in the top. So you want to start from the top in order to see that the right way. When these pieces were together, I showed you in the last episode how to take off that little bit of silver skin. That's a good indicator of where that line is. So essentially, you're going to find that line, and you're going to come right down in there. Big knife, little knife, doesn't totally matter which. If you use the little knife, if you're trying to really conserve this, you know, you can come along in there and just seam it out. Just follow that down with your knife and kind of get a good sense. Now, this is a really nice piece. We're going to use it for stew, which is very simple, and I'll show you that in the next episode. But for now, we're going to continue with this guy. All right, so I got some of that silver skin right on there. If you want, probably easier with the big knife, you could shave some of this off for your grind if you're saving your scraps for ground beef. I don't know where to put everything here. You can shave that down, right? And you can see that skin coming off right there under me. I want to do this just to show that to you as well. All right? So there, you can see that. That's what we're taking off here. Might even help to take the little knife. Just get right under there. Peel those pieces right off. I'm a little bit, maybe not so much right at the moment, but I'm a little bit more detail-oriented than some butchers. I try to leave as much of that meat on there as possible. You know, we'll use a little bit for grind, but some people just kind of hack away at that stuff. Figuring whatever they don't use will go in the grind. But the point is to make this stuff look really nice, right? I mean, that's what we want to do. We got to think of the chefs out there, and obviously you got to think of your dinner guests. So we're going to keep this stuff looking nice and pretty. All right, so we got that silver skin off there, right? And now you can see that piece of meat I was talking about, that nice sort of center column of the bottom round. And once you get this, you start to see the shape of the cube steaks right in here. And obviously, as you saw the bottom there, nice piece of fat. We're going to take our little knife and just start peeling away at that as well. All right? And kind of put your hand nice and flat on that. Give some resistance there to the knife. And just work down along the top there. See? Not taking too much meat off, but getting that fat out of there just the same. I've got this peeled back pretty well now. All right? You can finish it off with the big knife if you need to. No big deal. That end is going to taper. You're not going to get too much out of that. But, yeah, so we got that piece of fat off. And this is basically what we're going to use for our cube steaks right here. Got a little meat on there. If you want, you could kind of play with that. If you got any extra there, use that for your grind. That's good stuff to grind right up. But basically, not too much meat left on there. Right? And then got that nice fat right off, right into the scrap barrel. Okay, so here's our general piece of meat that we're going to use to make the cube steak. This one has a little bit of a side flap right there. I'm just going to throw this in my grind pile as well. And just to make sure it looks nice, got a little piece of silver skin. Okay, and that's it. So the important thing here, there's two important things actually when we're making these cube steaks. The first is we want to keep the steaks nice and thin, okay? Because that's going to be the secret to making sure they stay tender when you cook them in a really hot pan really fast. These are a nice, easy, fast dinner, but there's a couple of keys that your butcher needs to take care of, or if you're the butcher, you need to take care of to make sure these things turn out right. So one is to keep the steaks nice and thin when you cut them, and the second thing is obviously to go against that grain. So when we started doing this piece, obviously I took the pot roast off first. So, this whole piece wasn't for cube steaks. I did that first. So one thing I would have done if I were using the whole piece for cube steaks would be to square it up first so that I am doing what I said and making sure to go perpendicular to that grain. So I'm going to just take one cut here. Now this is not going to be a steak. Again, this is just to sort of square it up. Okay, so that's the front piece that we're working with. That's going to be our steaks, just angled towards me for cutting purposes. And I just took that up to square it off. This is going to make a nice piece for stew. If it's summertime, it's getting warm, you're not doing stews, we're going to throw that in our burger grind. So we can do that as well. So now that my piece is squared up, that'll ensure that as I cut these, it'll go right along the grain, which is exactly what we want. Okay? So once you do that, nice and thin. Now, I want you to use your big knife on this because it'll give you nice cuts all the way through, but be careful and go slow. And the way this is going to happen, okay, is you're going to start nice and thin. You want your hand to give you some support right here, and you're going to start cutting right across that grain. And just as you get into that piece a little bit, okay, so that you've made the cut, you're going to grab this side, just like this, and as you cut down, you're going to pull this steak out, okay? And as you go down, rock that knife back and forth, so then when you go down, your first cut should bring you almost all the way through, and then your second cut, as you pull it back, that's going to get you the rest of the way through. So you have a nice thin steak like this, okay? Can you see that? All right, so same thing. Hold that. As it comes down, as your knife hits the block, right, pull it back. Boom. Right through. Not too bad. All right, there's another one. Nice thin piece. All right. Couple more here. There you go. Right through. All right. We can even these out when we tenderize them with the hammer. That is something that you have to do with cube steak, same way we did with the bottom round steak. But as long as you stay along the grain, get a nice rhythm going, right? It's not always going to be absolutely perfect where every single cut, is down and through. The piece changes as you cut it. Sometimes your angle's going to change and you're going to have to readjust. right? Because you want to stay across that grain. But as you do it, you'll get that rhythm going, right? And you come down and through. There you go. Pull that side out. Boom. All right. Let me try and get one more, so just in case you haven't really seen it too good yet. All right. We're coming down here. Drive the tip of that knife forward. We're grabbing this side, and as we pull back, right? Boom. Right through. Just like that. All right? So those are going to be our cube steaks. Now, once you do that, you're going to lay them out on your block. If you have paper, if you're not doing this on a butcher block, put some wax paper down, or some butcher paper is even better, right? Do that, and you're just going to give these a nice pound, okay? Get the knives out of the way. Got meat all over the block. What could be better? We're eating good tonight, all right? So these are very thin. I would use the finer side. That's my coarse side. You can see that there. That's the finer side. You just give them a pound. Again, don't have to be crazy, right? We're not building a house. We're just tenderizing that meat, making sure it's nice and even. That's what we're really trying to accomplish here, is making sure sometimes a piece will be a little thicker on one side than the other. You're just trying to make sure it's nice and even and nice and tender, so that the heat and the flavor, if you're marinating it, really permeate into these pieces and make them easy to cook. So again, just as I've said before, watch the corners as you pound. You don't want to dig the corners down into the piece. All right? All right. As you pound them, on one side, just flip them over. All right? Do the same to the other side. Now again, you're not putting holes in the meat. You're just kind of making it nice and tender, going over it. Right? Right. There you go. Some nice, even cube steaks, right? Nice and evenly pounded, ready for a really hot pan. Best way to do those, a little bit of oil, some grass-fed butter, in a nice cast iron pan. Crank that heat up nice and hot. You're going to throw it in there and really let it sear. Maybe a little salt and pepper. Maybe, 15 to 30 seconds aside. Really not something that you have to cook really long, right? It's a minute steak. They call it a minute steak for a reason, because it cooks in about a minute. These are a great, quick dinner that you can do nice and easy. Now, same thing with the bottom round steak. This will probably go a little longer. This is even better on the grill. So we've tenderized that. We got our cube steaks. We're set to go. Grab some rolls, have some hot sauce, maybe some mayonnaise, and of course the cheese. And I'll see you next time.